Let's go. हेलो हेलो भाई, क्या कमेंट कर सकते हो क्या अभी? नाइस। अभी लोगों को आने दो, चलो और उसके बाद हम लोग डिस्कस करते हैं। ओके, अभी लोगों को ज्वाइन करते रहना दो। ज्वाइन ज्वाइन ज्वाइन। उसके बाद हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे अबाउट एआई। पता नहीं मेरा नोटिफिकेशन गया है या नहीं गया है। ज्वाइन करो भाई लोग, ज्वाइन करो। जल्दी से ज्वाइन करो, उसका हम लोग डिस्कस करते हैं। ऑफलाइन क्यों दिखा रहा है ये? What the heck? हेलो। I'm audible. Okay. क्या हुआ भाई, कोई नहीं आ रहा है? क्या हुआ भाई, कोई नहीं आ रहा है? AI, AI. Let's go, let's go. Switch account, okay. Refresh page. Nothing. Chat is a chat. Chat. Let's talk about AI and how to create your own LLM model. भाई कोई तो आ जाए जिसके साथ मैं बात कर सकूँ भाई। क्या हुआ भाई? डेट है क्या मेरे चैनल? डेट है क्या? इट्स माय चैनल। So let's go. Let's see something. How to make drone with that? How to make a drone that can fly in space as well as yeah. क्या कहता है इसमें देखना हूँ। In atmosphere out similar planning in space okay okay layers creating a bond atmosphere and hyperspace challenging. Powerhouse nuclear reactors for which okay. Life support applies with tools and technology needs. Let's go. हम देखते हैं क्या बोलता है। भाई कोई नहीं आ रहा भाई, मैं स्ट्रीम कर क्यों रहा हूँ? वेलकम। क्या हुआ? अच्छा अच्छा ओके। क्या तो काम कर रहा है भाई? एक यूजर मिल गया है, पता नहीं कौन है भाई। हेलो ब्रो, हेलो। हम लोग डिस्कस करने वाले एआई के बारे में। मैंने सो पहले हाय बोलो भाई, कौन हो जो भी देख रहे हो। आज हम लोग थोड़ा क्या बोलते हैं इंजन के बारे में देखेंगे, इंजन कैसे बनाते हैं। अगर इंटरेस्ट है कोई तो ये जो है इंटेलेक्स ए है, ये मेरा खुद का ए है जो मैंने बनाया। और हेलो। भाई अगर कोई देख रहे हो तो वो करो भाई, मैसेज करो, ताकि मुझे भी पता चले हाँ कोई तो देख रहा है। इसके बाद हम लोग और डिस्कस करेंगे। यहाँ पर तो एक ही दिखा रहा है वीडियो। और इतना स्लो है आज इंटरनेट। नॉर्मली तो इतना स्लो नहीं रहता भाई। प्रोजेक्ट 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 प्रोजेक्ट। तो कल हम लोग का जो एआई है वो थोड़ा सा मतलब, ये तो नॉर्मली है। इंजन इंजन हम लोग का मेथोडोलॉजी पार्ट। कैनवा किधर गया भाई, इधर पीपी था। पीपी भाई कौन कौन देख रहा है भाई, कुछ तो बोलो भाई, हेलो हाय बाय। ये भी पता चला। चार लोग को दिखा रहा है कि देख तो रहे हो, लेकिन पता है कि हेलो हेलो। माइक काम नहीं कर रहा क्या? इतना वो लेता टाइम लेता भाई, पता नहीं कैनवा में आज क्या चल रहा है। ये जो हम लोग का किया है, जो बेसिकली 8 बिलियन पैरामीटर का है। ये हम लोगों ने वो किया था कि हम लोग बेंचमार्क किया था जीपीटी में। तो GPT-4 आउट ऑफ 10 8 मिला था हम लोग का जो है 9। इन टर्म्स ऑफ क्रिएटिविटी में हम लोग तो अभी तक ठीक ही वो कर रहे हैं, डोमिनेट कर रहे हैं, पता नहीं बाकी क्या होता है। तो बेसिकली ये जो है हम लोग का ये है, यहाँ पर हम लोग वो कर सकते हैं, मेथोडोलॉजी सिलेक्ट कर सकते हैं। फॉर एग्जांपल कोई भी यहाँ पर सिलेक्ट करो, उधर। तो ये जो है कोडर अगर सिलेक्ट करते हो तो जो भी मतलब एक्सपर्ट अवेलेबल होगा उसके बिहाफ में मतलब आंसर करने की कोशिश करेगा। हम लोग का जो मेन पर्पस था इस एआई को बनाने का वही है भाई। तुम लोग तो वो नहीं करते अभी, कैसे हम लोग को पता चलेगा हम क्या पूछना चाह रहे हैं नहीं। हेलो हेलो, कौन देख रहा है भाई? एक बार तो हाय हेलो कुछ तो बोलो। हेलो, कौन देख रहा है भाई? एक बार तो हाय हेलो कुछ तो बोलो। हेलो, कौन देख रहा है भाई? ओके, अभी लोग नहीं चलेंगे। हाँ। हम्म, तुम लोग अगर ट्राई करना चाहो तो ट्राई कर सकते हो, ये intellex.masum.in, इसको मतलब अपने ब्राउजर में कर सकते हो। अभी मतलब जब तक मेरा पीसी होने तब तक यूज कर सकते हो इस एआई को मतलब। रुको मैं थोड़ा वो कर देता हूँ, बड़ा कर देता हूँ, नोटपैड में लिखता हूँ। ये वाला अगर टेस्ट करना चाहते हो कि ये एआई, वो पहले वो कर देना, इनेबल मेथोडोलॉजी रिस्पॉन्स ये बंद कर देना, ये मेथोडोलॉजी पार्ट थोड़ा अभी काम बाकी है। जस्ट एआई को टेस्ट करना है तो तुम लोग कर सकते हो। कौन देख रहा है भाई? एक बार हाय तो बोलो ताकि मेरे को भी पता चले। कोई यूज कर रहा है क्या एआई? लेट्स सी। नहीं नहीं, अभी तक तो किसी ने नहीं किया। हम्म, तो हम लोग का जो मेन पर्पस था इस एआई को बनाने का वो ये था कि हम लोग चाहते थे कि इन टर्म्स ऑफ क्रिएटिविटी जो है, एक कुछ ऐसा एआई बनाए जो चैट जीपीटी से भी ज़्यादा क्रिएटिव हो। इससे अच्छा मैं हैकिंग सिखाने से अच्छा था ना, लोग एटलीस्ट इंटरेस्टेड तो होगा। हम्म, पम para pam 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 pam। ये कौन है भाई जो लाइट करके चला भी गया? ला 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 ला। टीम लाइट। कौन चला? भाई कोई इंटरेस्टेड है क्या? नहीं क्या? हेलो हेलो। हाय तो बोलो भाई। मैं अगर हाय बोलो तो तब मैं कुछ बोल पाऊंगा, कुछ सिखा पाऊंगा। तो कुछ तो कुछ जो भी देख लो प्लीज हाय बोलो, प्लीज प्लीज। मैं अकेला ही बर्बाद कर रहा हूँ कुछ। चैट 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 करो भाई। वो करो, फुल स्क्रीन करो, तब तुम्हारा वो चैट का ऑप्शन आएगा शायद। नीचे। क्या है, नहीं पता भाई। Around 16. Let's see.
Running the full DeepSeek 671, it's about running the full DeepSeek 671, it's about a 404 gigabyte file as a local AI inference machine is challenging. Today, I'm going to show you what it looks like for a machine that actually is not insane and something that's actually pretty common sense and does the job. You do have to have a freakish amount of RAM, so there's no desktop class system that's going to do that.
भाई हाय बोलो भाई, मैं एआई के बारे में कुछ बताने वाला हूँ।
Just keep that in mind. But that freakish amount of RAM can come in either workstations or in server motherboards. For cost efficiency, server is gonna win. And for maximizing bandwidth per dollar spent, you're definitely gonna wanna look at your AMD EPICs. This rig today, without GPUs, it does have GPUs in it right now, but this rig without GPUs is about a $2,000 machine. Now, this does allow you to run the DeepSeek full Quant 4 at about 4 to 3.5 tokens per second, which is very respectable. There were a lot of things that had to be overcome. I'm going to show you those technical little things that were hitching me up. As well, there's a full accompanying document that is written up on all the installation.
इसको कैसे करो? तो कोई कौन कर रहा है भाई? प्लीज हाय हाय। क्या हुआ? ओके, हेलो हेलो। हेलो हेलो।
All the tips, all the tricks, everything from bare metal to you being able to ask a question is featured in there, including the complete configuration of Ollama and OpenWebUI on a machine that in the $2,000 price range is actually fairly reasonable for the performance that it gets. Wow, this is actually a very quiet rig versus probably one of the loudest servers out there. And I'll talk to you a bit about the hardware and some of the things that from 6 months ago I would probably recommend changing. There's not a tremendous amount. And actually, I've got to say, choosing this as the base system that I was recommending has turned out really good for people who went with this, because those 16 DIMMs allow you to use 32 gigabyte sticks, which are much cheaper than 64 gigabyte or 128 gigabyte sticks of DDR4. So we're going to look at some of the performance. We're also going to look at some of the gotchas that were hitting me from Ollama, and especially the environment variables, how I got around that. This won't be a video guide on the software setup until I get that working in an LXC or a Dockerized container fashion. Possibly we'll have to do that in a VM also, but it will be based in Proxmox, whatever we come up with for the final solution. This today is running bare metal on Ubuntu 24, and that 4 tokens per second was a result of a lot of tuning, because that started out at the 2s, and based on the tuning and the BIOS settings I'm going to show you, I was able to get it up substantially. Since we were able to get about 4 tokens per second, we also will go through a full test today, something that was just not possible the other day with it going so slow. So we will get to run our full gamut of questions against it. Of course, you can skip around to any chapter. Down below in the description, you'll find links to all those. As well, you can hover over the timeline and it should allow you to skip around. So I hope you're excited. Let's get started. So be sure to check out the link in the description below for the article that has all of the build, all of the software setup steps. Everything that I'm about to show you here is outlined there. And that is definitely something that you want to pay attention to, because each one of these things is pretty important. I'm not going to go over the entire article here at all, But what we are going to do is look at select parts of this that are important and critical for you to get right.
ये क्या हुआ? ये क्या हुआ? Guys. मैं एआई के बारे में डिस्कस करने आया था, उनको इंटरेस्ट ही नहीं है। क्या करो भाई? डिस्कस करो ना करो, लाइव स्ट्रीम कर क्यों रहा हूँ पता नहीं। हेलो। क्यों दिखा रहे? 2 लोग देख रहे हैं, लेकिन 2 लोग देख रहे हैं तो कमेंट क्यों नहीं कर रहा है कोई? अगर कोई कमेंट करेगा तभी तो मैं डिस्कस कर पाऊंगा ना। चैट करो, चैट में कुछ डाल दो। ओए, तो कोई what the heck? कहीं में कोई इंटरेस्ट नहीं है भाई एआई में। सीरियसली अरे भाई कोई हाई तो डाल दो प्लीज। मैं खुद ही डाल रहा हूँ, खुद ही को रिप्लाई कर रहा हूँ, क्या चल रहा है? और को उससे अच्छा तो कुछ काम ही कर लेता भाई। कुछ एक काम कर सकते हो तुम लोग, मेरा एआई को टेस्ट कर सकते हो अगर करना चाहो तो। मेरे को कमेंट में डाल देता। ये तुम अपने ब्राउजर में डाल के प्रॉम्प्ट दे सकते हो। अरे मैंने कमेंट तो किया था, क्या हुआ? तो फिर से एक बार वो करता हूँ। चैट में है भाई, ट्राई करना चाहो तो कर सकते हो। लेकिन ये जब तक मेरा कंप्यूटर ऑन है तब तक मतलब तुम यूज़ कर सकते हो, क्योंकि मैंने खुद का जो कोड है उसी में फॉलो किया है। ये जो मेथोडोलॉजी पार्ट है इसको ऑफ ही रखो। तुम लोग देख भी पा रहे हो क्या है? तो भाई तुम लोग लाइक से अच्छा कमेंट कर रहे हो भाई, लाइक कर रहे हो, लेकिन मुझे कमेंट चाहिए ताकि मैं तुम लोगों के साथ डिस्कस कर पाऊँ मेरा जो एआई है उसके बारे में। लाइक इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं है ब्रो, लाइक इम्पोर्टेंट नहीं है, मेरे को कमेंट चाहिए, कमेंट। क्या हुआ? हम लोग ने खुद का एक जो इंजन बनाया था, उसको मैं एक्सप्लेन करना तो चाह रहा हूँ लेकिन तुम लोग इंटरेस्टेड ही नहीं हो। ये हम लोग का जो इंजन है, किसी ने प्रॉम्प्ट दिया है क्या? नहीं, कोई नहीं दिया है अभी तक प्रॉम्प्ट। हाय हाय, हेलो एवरीवन, हेलो। तुम लोग लाइक कर रहे हो, तुम लोग कमेंट नहीं कर रहे, क्या है भाई, क्या है ये? 5 लाइक हो गए लेकिन एक भी कमेंट नहीं है अभी तक। सॉरी, चैट नहीं है। चैट करोगे तभी तो मैं डिस्कस कर पाऊंगा। ये पर हम लोग को इन्वेस्टमेंट भी चाहिए भाई, 30 से 40 लाख वो ट्रेनिंग के लिए। डोनेट, तुम लोग डोनेट भी कर दो। कमेंट नहीं कर रहे हो तो डोनेट करो, सॉरी क्या बोल रहा हूँ, कमेंट नहीं कर रहे तो डोनेट करो, डोनेट। ओके। ये हम लोगों ने वार के लिए वो किया था, मतलब थोड़ा सा मॉडिफाई किया था। ये है हम लोग का जो पर्पस था कि वार जोन, लाइक वार जोन सिचुएशन अगर हुआ तो उसमें मतलब कैसे हम लोग एआई को यूज कर सकते हैं। तो हम लोग ऑफलाइन वो बनाने वाले थे, 100 स्टूडेंट लेके 5 किलोमीटर का जो ड्यूरेशन होगा उसमें मतलब नोट बनाने वाले थे, लेकिन हुआ नहीं वो, वार ही खत्म हो गया। हम्म, तो ये हमारा जो है यूज केस था टेक्निकल मेडिकल फार्मिंग का। टेक्निकल में तो वो नॉर्मली टेक्निकल स्टफ जो है, कैसे मतलब सर्वाइवल टूल बनाना है। उसके बाद फॉर एग्जांपल खराब मतलब गंदा वाटर से कैसे प्यूरिफाई कर सकते हैं, एग्जिस्टिंग जो जो टूल है उससे मतलब कैसे हम लोग सर्वाइवल के लिए यूज कर सकते हैं। मेडिकल में अगर किसी का 3rd डिग्री बर्न हुआ या गोली लगा या तो पैर कट गया, उसको ट्रीटमेंट कैसे कर सकते हैं वेजिटेबल यूज करके। जो मतलब एग्जिस्टिंग वेजिटेबल तुम्हारे पास है, जस्ट एआई में डालना है, ये मेरे पास एग्जिस्टिंग वेजिटेबल्स है, उसके बाद ये मतलब प्लांट वगैरह है, तो उससे मतलब तुम लोग वो कर सकते हो, ट्रीटमेंट करवा सकते थे। और फार्मिंग के लिए वही कि क्या क्या फार्मिंग कर सकते हो, मतलब क्या क्या यूज़ कर सकते हो इस तरह का। लेकिन वो हुआ नहीं भाई, वो क्या बोलते हैं, वार ही खत्म हो गया। अच्छा ही हुआ, लेकिन फिर भी। और हम लोग वो हार्डवेयर के लिए सिर्फ एक लैपटॉप और एक सोलर पैनल से हम लोग को हो जाता, और डेटा अगर अपडेट करना है और मतलब शेयर करना है तो उसके लिए हम लोग वो यूएसबी ऑफलाइन। भाई कौन कौन देख रहा हो भाई, उसके बाद मैं एआई एक्सप्लेन दूंगा कि खुद का एआई कैसे बना सकते हो। इवन जीपीटी 4 से भी मतलब ज़्यादा क्रिएटिव एआई। और ऑलरेडी हम लोगों ने एआई है, क्या बोलते हैं ये, जो हम लोग का खुद का इंजन है, वो हम लोगों ने ऑलरेडी डेवलप कर चुका है। लेकिन अभी तक ना हम लोगों ने रिसर्च पेपर लिखा है, ना पेटेंट अभी तक किया, तो इसलिए मैं कोड तो नहीं दिखा सकता। पता नहीं क्या करो भाई, ओपन सोर्स करो या खुद का एक स्टार्टअप खोल के वहाँ पर लॉन्च करो, पता नहीं अभी क्या, कुछ सोचा नहीं है। भाई चैट करो ना प्लीज प्लीज भाई, तभी तो मतलब मैं थोड़ा एक्सप्लेन कर पाऊंगा क्या मैं बोल रहा हूँ, क्या वो कर रहा हूँ। तुम लोग को करो लाइव चैट में चैट करो भाई। तो किसी ने ये वाला हम लोग का ये यूज किया अभी तक? नहीं भाई, किसी ने नहीं यूज किया। और हम लोग का जो ये था, मतलब जो एआई हम लोगों ने बनाया था, हम लोगों ने बेसिकली मेटा का एआई यूज किया, लेकिन आर्किटेक्चर फुल्ली मॉडिफाई किया है हम लोगों ने। यहाँ पर हम लोग खुद का स्किल भी मतलब क्लोन कर सकते हो। फॉर एग्जांपल तुम वेब डेव करते हो, या राइटर हो, लॉयर हो, डॉक्टर हो, कुछ भी मतलब तुम अपने खुद का मेथोडोलॉजी अपलोड कर सकते हो। मेथोडोलॉजी कुछ नहीं है, मतलब तुम लोग जो मतलब तुम लोग का एक्सपीरियंस है। फॉर एग्जांपल अगर तुम डॉक्टर हो तो कैसे एक पेशेंट को ट्रीट करोगे, कुछ फेक सिनेरियो, मतलब जब तुम अपलोड करोगे तो कुछ एग्जांपल जनरेट होगा, उसके बिहाफ में तुमको आंसर करना होगा। उसके बाद सक्सेसफुली अपलोड हो जाएगा तुम्हारा जो भी है स्किल। और हम लोग सोच रहे कि इसको रेवेन्यू मॉडल में मतलब वो करें कि जो मतलब अपलोड करेगा उसको लाइफ टाइम एक अर्निंग मिलता है। पता नहीं भाई, हम लोग का अभी एआई जो है उसके लिए क्लाउड ही नहीं मिल रहा है। खुद का जो लोकल एक पीसी खरीदा, उसी में मतलब अपलोड किया है। भाई हेलो, लाइव चैट लाइव चैट, कुछ क्वेश्चन है तो पूछो भाई। एआई कैसे बनाना है, कैसे बना सकते हो, कैसे क्रिएट कर सकते हो, एलएलएम मॉडल कैसे ट्रेन करना है, कॉन्फ़िगरेशन कुछ तो पूछो, ताकि मैं आंसर कर पाऊँ। 2 बज गया भाई। वॉचिंग तो दिखा रहा है कि 3 3 लोग है। अभी नोचिंग कभी ओ ये हम लोग जब एआई था ये 3 बिलियन का था क्योंकि वार में तो ऑब्वियसली सबका लैपटॉप इतना पावरफुल नहीं होगा तो 3 बिलियन पैरामीटर वाला मॉडल यूज किया लेकिन हम लोगों ने इंजन जो है ये वाला इंजन यूज किया हम लोग का जो इंजन था आइंस्टाइन वाला बस वो क्या बात कर रहे हो भाई आज मैं वो क्या बोलते कोड को एक्सप्लेन करना चाहता था लेकिन तुम लोग इंटरेस्टेड ही नहीं हो ये oh methodology part sure. अब मेरा कंप्यूटर गर्म हो चुका है 54 डिग्री चला 52 डिग्री ये हग रहा है भाई ये हग रहा है भाई कमेंट करो क्या जानना है क्या सीखना चाहते हो सीखना है या तो कुछ भी पूछ सकते हो रैंडमली कुछ भी 5 लोग देख रहे हो भाई एक तो कमेंट करो अच्छे से और इंटेलेक्ट से है तुम लोग अभी ट्राई कर ही सकते हो अजीब गरीब फॉर्म दे दे ताकि मुझे भी पता चले कि 5 लोग देख रहे हो, एक तो कमेंट करो। तुम लोग लाइक करके चले जा रहे हो। कैसी बोली है, कैसी पहेली तुमसे कहानी। Okay, let's see a book. मुझे कहीं हेलो हेलो हेलो, कौन देख रहे हो, कौन देख रहे हो, हाय बोलो हाय। चलो कुछ नहीं, कोई नहीं होगा, तो क्या कर सकते हो। किसी दिन तो टाइम आज।
Let me first off say also, you really should have some Linux experience. If this is your first time, it's going to be a little bit rough. You might be able to get through it, but you're probably going to need to fall back on some additional guides. And docg is how we are running this. Of course, we have a bare metal setup this time around, which is quite a bit different than what we've had so far in the past. So I'm doing this so I can get a baseline, and that baseline we can use to say if there is a performance hit or not when we're looking at the containerized or virtual machine version of this inside Proxmox. And I can definitely say this performance is not got a lot to lose. So we really don't want to lose a lot of performance here. But at the same time, not having this occupy this full machine in the fashion that it is definitely something that has to happen. After we start our Llama service, and we'll send it a quick warm-up hello. And this is basically us getting the LLM pre-warmed. And then we're going to watch this little process kind of crawl up here. So if you look over here, you can see that I've got 64 showing. So one of the definite things you want to do here is disable symmetrical multi-threading. And a lot of what I'm going to tell you is going to be geared towards the context of this is what's optimal for a AMD EPYC class system. Really, you need massive amounts of bandwidth, and EPYCs provide massive amounts of bandwidth. Of course, a lot of people were asking me about 9000 series and stuff like that. I mean, certainly, you can, like I mentioned prior, make your own decisions about that, but I think that, yeah, the more you spend, the better you'll get. The difference is not gonna be insane, but at the same time, it might be worth it to you. I would say, if you're new to LLM, at the same time, it might be worth it to you. I would say, if you're new to at the same time, it might be worth it to you. I would say, if you're new to at the same time, it might be worth it to you. I would say, if you're new to at the same time, it might be worth it to you. I would say, if you're new to at the same time, it might be worth it to you. I would say, if you're new to at the same time, it might be worth it to you. I would say, if you're new in general, consider that eventually you're gonna want to get some GPUs, but starting off with a good rig that can have GPUs added into it is something you should definitely think about. And if you check back in this channel's history while you're hitting like and subscribe, then you'll see lots of guides that I put out for $150 machines, $350 machines, all the way up to what we're seeing over here, which with the 4 3090s, it was about a $5,000-ish build. So today you're looking at about $2,000 for a baseline, and there is a couple of processors that, boy, I wish I would have gotten those instead of what I ended up getting, but they weren't available for cheap prices back then. So there are some really good tips. Make sure you stick with watching us on this. So we're going to see over here, I'll just describe the process of how it's starting up from an HTOP view. HTOP is one of the things, if you follow through the written guide, you'll end up installing also. It's not going to show you your GPUs. So if you want to look at your GPUs, you need to use NVTOP. NVTOP, you'll see here, is not doing any. Running the full DeepSeek 671, it's about a 404 gigabyte. The link in the description apps, everything that are important and critical for you to get right. Let me first off say also, so this is what's optimal for a AMD EPYC class system. Really, you need massive amounts of bandwidth, and EPYCs provide massive amounts of bandwidth. In this channel, it's important. File that one under very important. Even with quad 3090s, I do get 96 extra gigabytes of space, and that is nice, but it does not dramatically speed up the tokens per second. It can allow me to go bigger on the context window, which is nice, and I guess it helps maintain some of the performance as I do that. I did try upping with like a swap file all the way up to like 32K, and it was pretty bad. So if you are thinking that you want to get up to a higher than 24K window, honestly higher than 16, you should probably get an additional 64 gigabytes of RAM. And the way to do that is to get the 64 gigabyte DIMMs, ideally, instead of the 32 gigabyte DIMMs, because that will allow you to stack up 2 extra and pull out 2 of the 32 gigabytes. Or if you just go with 64 gigabytes, again, this motherboard, the MZ32AR0, really good because it has all those 16 DIMM slots available, and it also has really cool things that the article shows you how to go through, like the BMC, how to set up everything, how to install with the remote media, which is really nice, especially if you want something that doesn't have to have a display attached to it, that you can kind of park in a corner or a closet or something and not really spend a lot of time thinking about it. as well, the noise level on this thing is like non-existent versus, boy, that 40 R930, whoo, that thing, it chugged. So right now we're about to kick it over the process. So you see the res, that's the reserve of system memory, is hitting 369. It's crossing over the vert, which is 378. And you'll see that number jump up, and that's a big reserve spot that they're taking of RAM. And that's because the
चैट करो, चैट करो, क्या जानना है? और कोई बात ही नहीं होगा, हम लोग डिस्कस कर सकेंगे। चैट, लाइव चैट में लिखो भाई, क्या जानना है? या तो और लाइव चैट में मैंने लिंक भी दिया मेरा खुद का एआई का। मेरा अभी तो वो नहीं किया है, फुल्ली लॉन्च तो नहीं किया है। हाँ, हेलो हेलो हेलो, किसी ने कॉल किया? है इतना सारा क्यों लॉन्च हुआ? अरे भाई, जो भी देख रहे हो प्लीज वो करो ना, कमेंट करो एआई के बारे में। चलो भाई, तुम लोग कमेंट भी नहीं कर रहे, वीडियो देख रहा हूँ।
The rest of this is the context window filling up inside here. And you'll see this approach right around 450-ish gigabytes and start kicking off and running. There is a little bit of swap activity for it to get there and run, but it's not a tremendous amount of swap activity. And I'll just give you a real quick idea of what that tokens per second looks like for it to respond back. That's 4.31 tokens per second that we're able to get on this machine. Now that's going to degrade as you ask it additional questions. And also I have num parallel set to 1. So if I open up another chat window and throw something at it, it has to kind of unload and reload. So that slows things down as well. So let's go ahead and I'm going to kick off the questions because it will take a while for it to get the answers here still. Just because of the nature of it being a reasoning model, it's not necessarily the fastest thing in the world. So this is question 1, which is, you are an expert Python developer, create a highly accurate Flappy Bird game clone called Flippy Block Extreme in Python. Add all additional features that would be expected in a common user interface. Do not use external assets for anything. If you need assets created, generate them in the code only. Only use Pygame. Fully review your code and correct any issues after you produce the first version. So we'll send this off to it. It'll start thinking on it. And I'm going to show you real quick a couple of things about docg here that you might get hung up on. So make sure that you have your network when you first install the compose. If you just copy over the information I've got on the website, which is right over here, that copy code. If you copy that over into your docg, then when you set up your compose for OpenWebUI the first time, make sure you tick the little box at the bottom that says network for default docg default external true, and that'll give you access outside of your essentially little Docker host. And you need that because we're communicating with this over a different IP address. So I'm on, I think like 182 or something, and you can see up here, this is at give your machine a static IP address. I go over all this stuff in the article, but do make sure that you do that. It'll greatly help you out, because when you come over to your Open Web UI, and this will keep running, but we're going to go over here to the admin settings really quick, and I'm going to show you your connections. Right here is where you're going to connect to your external interface that I showed you how to set up in the article. And as soon as you do that, go to your manage, paste in the model, and especially be mindful of this. If you click here, you can go to the most recent by clicking newest. I like to do that all the time. And if you select here, go to the 671. Really quick, another common question. I didn't want to divert on it. Arch Quinn 2. So you can see the 7B is a Quinn 2. The 8B, Arch Llama. And the 14B, Arch Quinn 2. And the 32B, Arch Quinn 2. The 70, Llama. So all of these are not DeepSeek Arch. And if you go all the way to 671B, then you get to the DeepSeek 2. That is where you really have the full model. Now we will do the unslot thing, but that's going to have to be a different video because this video will just go on way too long otherwise. So let's see if it's kicked off its thought processes yet. So what you're going to do is you're going to take just this part and you're going to come back over. It looks like it dropped that down really quick here, and put it in here and then hit the download button. I've already got it, so of course no need for me to do that again. And also I show you how to pull it from the command line and how to set up a Llama as a system service running on Ubuntu 24 in the article. That's probably the way to go right now. And I did overcome the GPU issues that I was facing, which, whew, that was a lot of me messing around trying to get that figured out. Ah, damn it. Okay, so if you click out of the window, maybe it closes it there, it looks like. But while it's doing that, I'll talk really quick about some AMD CPUs that are really, really attractive looking. So a couple things to keep in mind. Unlocked is something you must see if you see a Dell or a Lenovo. That is a locked CPU. So keep in mind, a lot of the epics that came OEM as part of a Dell or something like that system are locked. Those will not be able to be used by you. Now, this 7V13 is a 64 core and it looks really interesting, but it is also an ES processor. I know that there can be some pretty big issues with the ES processors, but the price, $599, is really good. There was quite a few of these that were out here, and so if you know about the 7V13, drop some information. The 7C13, however, I did find quite a bit of information about that. That was in the comments last time somebody dropped this amazing recommendation. And these look like a real killer CPU. So 64 cores, 128 threads. These can hit 3.7. As you're going to see over here, everything is maxed out. And I'm going to show you the settings so that you can get it there also. But I mean, we started out at almost, it was horrible, like 2 tokens per second. And by going and running through a bunch of different benchmarks, so I'm probably going to do a written article about how to compile llama.cpp and run it against your system. And
भाई कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं कर रहा बाल मतलब एआई के बारे में जानना नहीं है क्या? सब कुछ पता है क्या तुम लोगों को? हाँ, सब कुछ पता है क्या? भाई पूछो, नहीं तो मैं फिर से रैंडम वीडियो लगा के बैठा रहूंगा जब तक कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं करेगा। क्वेश्चन करो क्वेश्चन। और ये क्या बोलते हैं, हम लोग को एआई सर्विस गाइस प्लीज, कोई अभी तक एक भी पंप नहीं दिया भाई। ये हम लोग के दिस वन, मैंने वो चैट में भी लिंक दिया है भाई, लेकिन वो सिर्फ जब तक मेरा कंप्यूटर ऑन है तब तक यूज कर सकते हैं। टेस्ट करो, उसके बाद हम लोग डिस्कस करेंगे कैसे बनाना है एआई को। ऑलरेडी मैंने थोड़ा बहुत बोल ही दिया कि हम लोगों ने क्या क्या अभी तक अचीव किया है। ये देखो भाई, बेंचमार्क है, बेंचमार्क GPT-4 1 ट्रिलियन पैरामीटर है भाई, और हम लोग का सिर्फ 8 बिलियन पैरामीटर। स्टिल इन टर्म्स ऑफ क्रिएटिविटी एक तो ज़्यादा है आउट ऑफ 10। 9999। रिस्क टेकिंग भाई हम लोग 9। रिस्क टेकिंग शायद थोड़ा कम करूँगा, क्योंकि थोड़ा रिस्क टेकिंग करने से थोड़ा वो लगता है चूक गया, इसलिए मैंने सोचा कि रिस्क टेकिंग थोड़ा कम कर दूँ। ये हम लोग का मेथड ये पार्ट है। कैसे हम लोग कैटेगोराइज किया है हम लोगों ने, उसके बाद सिलेक्ट करना है, एक्सपर्ट सिलेक्ट करना है, उसके बाद उसी एक्सपर्ट के भी हाथ में रिस्पॉन्स है। चलो भाई, तुम लोग को पता है फायदा नहीं है भाई, कोई कमेंट ही नहीं, तारक मेहता देख गया।
The plan for this video was simple. Pick up an HP Z440 workstation, chuck in a ton of upgrades, and see if this decade-old system can still pull its weight as a budget workstation or home server. And, well, yeah, that's exactly what I did. But this whole process turned out to be quite a bit more interesting than I expected. Some of this was due to less than ideal choices made by HP, shocker, but I also uncovered some really helpful features and even stumbled across a useful trick that I had never heard of before. I was actually really impressed with this machine's final form, but getting there was definitely a bit of a roller coaster.
It actually worked! Oh my god!
That being said, roller coasters are fun, so let's get started. Now, to upgrade a system like this, we're going to need a lot of different components, like a better CPU, more RAM, and also a ton of storage. I'm not a big fan of spending an arm and a leg on hard drives though, which is why I often turn to manufacturer recertified drives from Server Part Deals, the sponsor of today's video. Actually, they didn't just sponsor this video, they also sent over 5 24TB Seagate Exos drives for me to use in this project. If you're not familiar with Server Part Deals, they're one of the largest suppliers of manufacturer recertified drives, and their pricing can save you a ton of money. That means you can grab larger capacities or even pick up an extra drive or two as spares, all while staying under your budget. Now, I know some people are hesitant about non-new drives, but Server Part Deals recertified drives come straight from the manufacturer and go through extensive testing. They check smart data, run read-write tests, do performance benchmarking, and even perform sector scans to verify every part of the drive. Honestly, the chances of getting a dead-on-arrival drive are sometimes lower than with brand new ones. In fact, I actually recently had a few brand new Seagate drives fail in my TrueNAS server, and I swapped those out with recerts from Server Part Deals. On top of the great selection and pricing, Server Part Deals also offers free 2-day shipping on all orders, top-notch packaging to ensure safe delivery, and an incredible support team to help with any technical issues or RMAs. If you're looking to stretch your budget and still get high-quality storage, make sure to check out Server Part Deals today by using my link down in the description, and if you use code HAVEN, you can get $5 off any order. I've been wanting to make a video on the HP Z440 for a while now. These workstation systems are roughly a decade old at this point, so not exactly cutting edge, but they're pretty easy to find and fairly inexpensive. While the Haswell and Broadwell Xeon CPUs that it supports aren't going to be incredible in terms of performance, they're becoming cheaper and cheaper each day and might still provide plenty of horsepower for certain workloads and also allow for a lot of memory. That being said, the real draw of these budget workstations isn't the CPU, it's the features and room for expandability that they offer. So like I said, I decided to snag one, load it up with hardware, and see if it could serve as a capable budget workstation or a versatile all-in-one home server. But before we start with any upgrades, let's take a look at the system I picked up. I found this Z440 locally on Facebook Marketplace, and well, it's hard to tell exactly how much I paid for it because I bought both the Z440 and a laptop for $200. Here in the US though, you can often find these selling on eBay for around or even under $100. Overall, it's a pretty simple looking system with modest I/O on the front and back. On the front, there are 4 USB 3 Type A ports, 3.5mm microphone and headphone jacks, and the power button. Above that is a slim DVD drive and 2 blank 5.25-inch bays. On the back there are a few more USB ports and audio jacks, and then a gigabit Ethernet port. And here you'll notice that it says AMT. That's because this supports Intel's active management technology, which if set up, can give you some helpful remote management features. We'll take a look at that later on though. The system gets a lot more interesting if we take off the side panel. Now, I accidentally messed up and forgot when I filmed this teardown that I had already taken off this shroud, which has some fans for the memory. But you can see here from a later clip that all you have to do is pinch these two little tabs and then pull it out. It actually just connects to the motherboard via this little 6-pin header. With the cover and shroud off, we can see all 8 memory sockets, which can support quad-channel DDR4 registered ECC memory. Below that, there are a variety of PCIe slots, 2 of which are Gen 3x16, as well as an older PCI slot. There are also 6 SATA ports, but sadly with this system, there aren't any M.2 NVMe slots. Now to power all of these potential PCIe devices and hard drives, there's a 700 watt power supply, and it even comes with 2 6-pin PCIe connectors for a GPU. Speaking of GPUs, the graphics card in this can easily be removed thanks to the fact that most maintenance in this system can be done toolless. Now this GPU is not what I was expecting, as I assumed this would have some sort of NVIDIA NVS or Quadro card, but it actually came with what I eventually found out was an AMD R7 250, which I doubt I'm going to get much use out of. I'm also probably not going to get much use out of the 320GB or 500GB hard drives, but I will make use of the 2 empty 3.5-inch drive bays. My system came with just one 8GB stick of DDR4, which isn't terrible, but considering this has 8 sockets, it feels like barely anything. I took off the CPU heatsink to find the Xeon underneath, which was an E5-1620v4. Now this 4-core 8-thread chip isn't all that exciting, but like I said, we will be upgrading it. Before upgrading anything though, I needed to get this thing cleaned up because, well, it was pretty dusty. Now normally this is the part of the video where I take everything out of the system and then dust it out on my back porch, but it was raining so I had to clean up everything in my garage. My garage is an eyesore at the moment though, so rather than making you endure watching that, I figured you might just enjoy some soothing rain sounds. After getting everything cleaned up, putting the system back together was as easy as... With all of the dust cleaned out, I was actually pretty impressed with just how clean this system looked. Also, you might be wondering why I put this back together as is, rather than tossing in some sweet upgrades. And this was partially because I wanted to run some benchmarks with the original system, just for a baseline, but mostly it was because I wanted to update the BIOS to the most recent version, just to make sure it would support any newer CPUs. Now I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit here, but I did look around in the BIOS just a bit, and was sort of disappointed that I couldn't find a feature that I was really hoping for, PCIe bifurcation. This essentially lets you split up the PCIe lanes into smaller chunks, and it's perfect for something like having a quad NVMe card like this one. This could help a lot if you're using this either as a workstation or as a home server by letting you have multiple NVMe SSDs for faster speeds and redundancy. However, if this doesn't support bifurcation, it makes doing this much more expensive. Bifurcation should be supported by the CPU and chipset, but sadly it's not there. That is until I actually updated the BIOS and all of a sudden bifurcation was available, and this actually really surprised me.
It actually worked! Oh my god! I can't believe that did it.
With the most up-to-date BIOS installed, it was time to upgrade the CPU. With the most recent BIOS installed and a system that was definitely powered down, it was time to upgrade the CPU. Now I could have gone for something crazy like the E5-2699v4, which has 22 cores and 44 threads. Or I could have also gone with something like the 2697v4, which only has 18 cores, but I found you can get these for stupid cheap at like $30 on eBay. What I ended up going with instead was the E5-2687w v4, and if you're wondering why, well, that's a great question with a really long and boring answer. But the short story is I couldn't wait a week for a different CPU to come in, so I ended up just going with this. Now it's only a 12-core 24-thread chip, but it's not all bad. With it being a W or workstation CPU, this does have a higher base and turbo frequency than most of the other high core count chips. So hopefully with the 12 cores, it can still be a decent performer with multi-threaded tasks, but also have better single-threaded performance. Now I didn't go crazy and put this CPU's 1.5TB memory capacity to the test, but I did pick up 8 32GB sticks for a total of 256GB of registered ECC DDR4. And after getting all of that installed, the system posted without any issues. As excited as I was to see what this could do as a home server, I first wanted to see if it could potentially be a solid yet relatively inexpensive workstation. For most workloads, an R7 250 isn't going to cut it, so I wanted to swap out the GPU. Sadly, the best card I had available was an RTX 3060 12GB, but it requires 2 8-pin connectors. The Z440 only has dual 6-pins. The next best GPU I had on hand was an RTX A2000, but I don't have the full height bracket, so I grabbed the third best GPU I have, which is an RTX 3050 6GB. That booted up just fine, but the NVIDIA drivers failed to install because, well, my SSD was full. For some reason, I thought I grabbed a 256 gig SSD, but I accidentally installed Windows onto a 128 gig SSD. Normally this wouldn't have been that big of a deal, but well, it turns out Windows has some issues when you have twice as much RAM as you do storage. After a bit of tinkering, I managed to get the hibernation file size down just a bit, and I was able to install the drivers. But I also added a second SSD just to give myself a bit more breathing room. I also tossed in a 10 gig SFP Plus card so that I could quickly access files and projects from my TrueNet server. With a bit more space, I installed DaVinci Resolve to test out some video editing and rendering. Editing a 4K timeline was mostly pretty smooth, with most hiccups seemingly due to a GPU limitation rather than a CPU limitation. When rendering out the timeline, I opted to just use the CPU rather than GPU for encoding, and this probably isn't the most realistic use case, but would provide a bit more of an apples-to-apples comparison to my personal editing PC. And, well, the result wasn't that great, with the render taking about 4 times as long as my Ryzen 3950X. Now to be fair, the 3950X has more cores, higher clock speeds, is much newer, and is much more expensive on the used market. I also ran the Blender benchmarking tool, and here the Broadwell Xeon looked a little bit better in comparison. The 3950X was between just 65 to 90% faster, depending on which of the 3 tests you look at. I also ran Cinebench R23, and here I have a lot more data to pull from a variety of systems. First, I have the original configuration of the HP C440 with the E5-1620v4. I also grabbed numbers for a little mini PC with an Intel N100, the MSO1 with its i9-13900H, and the Dell Optiplex with a Ryzen 7 1700. When looking at the multi-threaded results, the 2678W-V4 performed pretty well, only being outclassed by the much more modern i9-13900H. If we look at the single-threaded benchmark though, things don't look nearly as good, with the 2678W-V4 actually being the worst performer. The 13900H still takes a massive lead, and this is also a decent example of how solid the N100 can be in single-threaded workloads when compared to systems from just a few years ago. If we take a look at total system power draw, the C440 with the E5-2678W-V4 doesn't look all that great. In fact, when running Cinebench R23, this was the highest power draw I've had of any system I've tested on the channel at 192 watts. The idle power draw at 47 watts isn't that great, but it's also important to keep in mind that this was with the R7-250 installed. If we were able to remove that, the power draw might be a little bit lower. This last chart here is just showing the Cinebench R23 multi-threaded results alongside the total system power while running the benchmark. And this just goes to show how something much more modern like the i9-13900H can perform significantly better while drawing roughly half the power. If you're looking for a workstation where CPU performance and efficiency is your top priority, this might not be the best solution. However, if your workloads primarily just require you to have a ton of memory or access to a lot of PCIe slots, this might actually be a decent option. The CPU performance is pretty lackluster, but you're probably going to struggle to affordably build or find a system where you can chuck in 256 gigs of RAM or have access to 40 PCIe lanes. So depending on the use case, even a decade after its release, this could be a potential workstation option. But all of that RAM and all of those PCIe slots could also be really helpful in a home server situation, especially if you were looking to essentially run your entire home lab all within one system. For this, I installed Proxmox as a hypervisor. I also wanted to see if this system would run headless or without a GPU to try and cut down on the power usage. Now, I've rarely run into issues when doing this, but when I tried to boot the Z440 without a GPU, it was not happy and proceeded to tell me about it in the form of some very angry beeps. This was sort of odd because I've done this with plenty of systems and I sort of expected with this being a workstation that, well, it would just work. Or at least be an option, but when I looked in the BIOS to see if there was any sort of headless mode option or the option to disable a warning, there was nothing. I started to just accept it and move on, but I figured if I was wrong for some reason, I would never hear the end of it in the comments, so I decided to dig a little bit deeper. And I eventually ended up stumbling across a Reddit thread talking about an older Z240, and there someone mentioned using HP's BIOS configuration utility. Now, I had never heard of this before, but I downloaded it and tinkered around for a little bit and eventually was able to get the config from the BIOS. And here I was able to find a value called headless boot. Now, you're supposed to be able to set that value to enabled with a capital E, but for some reason, whenever I would try to do that, it seemed like the application was just changing it to all lowercase regardless of what I tried. So rather than using the application to set the value, I instead just saved the entire configuration to a text file, edited that one value, and then set the config using my edited file. And after that, no more angry beeps. It's really annoying that these hidden BIOS options exist in the first place, but I am glad that I found this software because who knows, it might come in handy in the future. Without a GPU, while sitting idle in Proxmox, the system was drawing around 38 watts, but after running PowerTop's autotune function and setting the scaling governor to power save, I got it to drop down to around 35 watts. Now at this point, Proxmox was just installed on a SATA SSD, but knowing that bifurcation was an option, I decided to install two NVMe SSDs via that quad PCIe adapter. After enabling by4 bifurcation on that slot, I was able to install Proxmox to both NVMe SSDs using a ZFS mirror for some redundancy, and the Z440 had no issues booting via PCIe. And with that done, it was time to deck this thing out. You would think that after going through all the trouble of getting this thing to boot without a GPU, that I wouldn't want to immediately put one back in, but I figured a GPU might be helpful for some tasks like transcoding. I didn't want to use the top slot again because, well, I didn't want to block some of the slots beneath it, but the 3056 gig was just a little bit too big to fit in the bottom by 16 slot. It's not quite as sexy, but the Quadro P620 can still do a decent job at some hardware accelerated transcoding. I also added the 10 gig SFP Plus card back in, as well as a quad Intel 2.5 gigabit NIC, which was able to go into the Gen 2x4 slot. For some more storage, I added two more NVMe SSDs to fill up the quad adapter, and also started dropping in the 24TB hard drives from server part deals. The first drive was easy, but for the second, well, I needed another drive tray. I was able to find a simple model to 3D print, but for some reason in the slicer there was a gap here, so it ended up coming out in multiple pieces, making it a little bit more difficult to assemble. It also didn't help that in true hardware haven fashion, I put it on backwards the first time. For the other three hard drives, I pulled out this 3-bay adapter that I've used in the past from ICDock, which would go in the two 5.25 inch bays on the front. Before sliding it in, I plugged in some SATA cables as well as a power splitter just to make life a little bit easier. I probably could have slid it a little bit further back so that it was flush with the front of the case, but I preferred to have a little bit of extra breathing room on the back. I was a little bit concerned about heat with all of these PCIe cards bunched up together. Plus, there was just this big empty space in the bottom corner just begging for something. So I found a model for attaching a 92mm fan to the front, but I made some tweaks to it to fit an 80mm fan since I didn't have any 92mm fans on hand. And then to really make sure that airflow got back to the PCIe cards, I designed a really simple duct and printed that out. It was a little awkward, but I eventually got everything snapped into place. Now there is another case fan header on the motherboard that wasn't being used, but I wanted this little Noctua fan to really push some air, so I just hooked it up using a Molex adapter. And with all of that crammed into the case, I powered it on and, well, it booted up just fine. All the cards were recognized and working, and you could feel that the little fan was actually moving quite a bit of air through the PCIe cards. With all of that hardware, I had a lot of options for virtual machines and containers, and I started off by setting up an instance of TrueNAS Scale. I configured the 10 gig SFP Plus card as a bridge, and then passed through a virtual 10 gig NIC to TrueNAS. I also passed through both SATA controllers with PCIe pass-through, but, well, here I was a little concerned because one of the controllers shared an IOMMU group with the system management bus, but passing that through as well didn't seem to cause any noticeable issues. To have a little bit of flash storage available, I also passed through the 3rd and 4th NVMe SSDs. Oh, and I also configured this VM with 128 gigs of RAM since, well, you know I have 256. After setting up networking and some pools, I had a pretty decent little TrueNAS box with plenty of caching, almost 100 terabytes of usable hard drive space, as well as some NVMe flash storage. Setting up hardware accelerated transcoding with the NVIDIA GPU was a bit of a pain, but I eventually got it working in a Jellyfin LXC container. I also ran an instance of OpenSense, passing through the quad Intel NIC so that I could run a forbidden virtualized router, and then I set up a few more VMs and containers like Home Assistant, as well as Crafty Controller, where the 24 threads and 128 gigs of RAM was easily able to run multiple Minecraft servers. Now with all that hardware, the system was no longer pulling just 35 watts, and instead was typically sitting at around 115 watts or so. Now sure, that's not amazing, but if you were to split all of these workloads out across multiple systems with a dedicated router and NAS, odds are you'd likely see the total power draw be close to something like that. So it's not that terrible considering all of the hardware packed into this thing. Oh yeah, earlier I mentioned that this supports Intel's AMT platform for remote management, and I did give that a shot. When booting up the system, you can hold down Ctrl-P to get to the MEBX setup menu, and after creating an admin password, I was able to configure and apply the network settings. Then using an application called Mesh Central, you can access the machine using AMT. I've had decent luck in the past with certain systems, but the only functionality I was able to work out here was being able to power on and off the system. I wasn't expecting to get KVM access since the system doesn't have integrated graphics, but I also wasn't able to get serial over LAN working either. This might have been due to the fact that I was getting a warning that I needed to update the AMT firmware, but the provided link wasn't, well, all that helpful. I didn't care to spend too much more time on this though, and honestly a cheap KVM solution might be the better option anyway. So I finally got to make a video on the HP Z440, but, well, how do I feel about it? Honestly, it was a bit more of a pain to tinker with than I was expecting, but once I got some of the kinks worked out, it was a pretty solid little system. well, not a little system, it's pretty big, but it's definitely still capable even 10 years after its release. High core count Broadwell Xeons are becoming extremely affordable, and registered ECC DDR4 is also getting less expensive over time, so there are a lot of upgrade possibilities. And that's not even mentioning the 40 available PCIe lanes, storage options, and features that you can often only get with more professionally geared systems. So this could be a good option if, let's say, you're specifically needing a high core count server, and you also want to be able to leverage bifurcation to get access to like 8 NVMe SSDs or something. Or maybe you need a budget workstation for an application that really just needs tons and tons of memory. Or maybe you just want to pick up a cheap system that isn't perfect, but is a lot of fun to tinker with, and, well, this thing was definitely able to do that. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if so, maybe drop a like and consider subscribing. If you want to support the channel even more and get access to some cool perks, maybe consider becoming a raid member for as little as $1 a month. With that, you get early access to all my videos without any ads. That's about it for this one though, so as always, thank you so much for watching, stay curious, and I really can't wait to see you in the next one.
तुम लोग तो कुछ कमेंट नहीं कर रहे, मैं रैंडमली वीडियो देख के बोर हो रहे हैं। तुम लोग तो कुछ कमेंट नहीं कर रहे, मैं रैंडमली वीडियो। ठीक है भाई, गुड नाइट।